You are listening to Something Rather Than Nothing. Creator and host, Ken Vellante. Editor and producer, Peter Bauer.
This is Ken Vellante with the Something Rather Than Nothing podcast, and very pleased to welcome Florence Williams, who is a writer. She's a lot more than a writer, but I'm familiar with the Nature Fix, which is a great book. Heartbreak, her most recent, a personal and scientific journey, which I just learned recently. Florence won the 2023 Penn E.O. Wilson Award for Literary Science. So I wanted to welcome you and say congratulations on that award.
Thank you so much, Ken. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I loved when I read the end of what you won it for, the literary science writing. I became it helped me understand those words. Just helped me understand some of your writing, and moving between science and personal and human experience and creativity. I also wanted to mention the first time I came into contact with your work was the 3-Day Effect on Audible, that podcast, which was just a wonderful work. So I was introduced to you in that podcast.
Oh, that's great. You found that.
Really enjoyed that. So Florence, I wanted to get right into you as an artist, you as a writer. When did you see yourself as an artist, or if you prefer, when did you see yourself as a writer, however you wish to approach it?
Well, I guess I saw myself as an aspiring artist when I was 9, because that's when I knew I wanted to be a writer. I'm not sure I would have applied the word artist to it. But I was reading a lot of fiction, adult fiction, I guess. And I think there was something about the sort of outsider status of first-person narrators in fiction that appealed to me. At the time, my parents were divorced, and I think I saw myself as being a little bit different, from other people, the way I think a lot of self-described artists do.
Yeah.
And there's something about that outsider status that I think enables us to try to process the world and share it, I guess.
Yeah, I like the word outsider because it feels like a perspective thing, just the ability to do something different. I guess, writing a book feels different, and you might be around a writer crowd, but that's, such a different thing to do or to think about. And one of the things I find fascinating about your writing and is how you immerse the scientific and the personal with it, right? So it's very experiential. It's not the type of science writing you think of, that literary science writing, right? The term literary, it's not. It has the science in the background, and you go deep into that. But it tends to have more of that personal, and I think the listener or reader can understand, because it's so personal, why you've arrived at that. I wanted to talk about the Nature Fix and its relation to creativity. I mentioned the 3-Day Effect podcast, and when I listened to it, it was very influential on me because I was just starting to put together things in my head. I'm a city kid. I've lived out in Oregon for 11 years and just learned more about the woods. And I didn't have the language or couldn't quite figure out some of the things I was experiencing, or maybe feeling more creative, at ease. And in the 3-Day Effect, you look to arrive at that something happens to a person when they're in this environment, that the environment in and of itself can help change and can also inspire creativity. So could you talk a little bit about your exploration there and your realization of the connection between, say, that environment and art and creativity?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I always knew that I got my best ideas outside, when I was walking, and I walk every day. I've been lucky to live in beautiful places for a lot of my adult life, not all of it, but for a lot of it. where I could, walk places that felt peaceful, and not too busy and not too noisy and not too, crazy. And I just became really interested in why that happened, why I was able to think more clearly outside. And of course, there's a lot of literature and history about this. We know that Thoreau, got a lot of his ideas outside. I mean, a lot of inventors, like Nikola Tesla, came up with the design for his engine while he was walking in a park. Wordsworth, walked 10,000 miles in his life and actually composed poetry while he was walking. and that made total sense to me. But it wasn't until I started to kind of delve into the psychology of it and the science of it that I started to learn some of the possible reasons that might be happening. So I'm really drawn to this phrase popularized by the Kaplans, who are environmental psychologists at the University of Michigan, Rachel and Stephen Kaplan. And it's this term, soft fascination, which is kind of where our brains are when we're wandering around in a pleasant, natural setting. There's kind of this sweet spot of not being boring. And also, the landscape is not boring, but it's also not overstimulating.
Yeah.
And it's in that sweet spot of kind of soft fascination that our minds can really wander in this really fruitful way. And then I was really interested to learn about the work of cognitive neuroscientist David Strayer at the University of Utah, who noticed, he actually administered tests of creativity and found that people's creativity improved 50% after they'd been outside for a few days. And he started to think more about what that actually meant in terms of the real estate in our brain, like where was the activation going, where was the blood flow going. And, he seemed to kind of notice that our frontal cortex, which is kind of our thinking, task-oriented, kind of executive functioning brain, kind of goes offline after we've been outside for a while as our sensory brains and our more emotional brains wake up. The reality is that in daily modern life, most of us are still living in our frontal cortex all the time. We're shutting out sensory input. We don't really want to hear the street noise or the garbage, or want to see all those flashing lights, as we're trying to drive through an intersection or something. We can't listen to the radio and drive through an intersection at the same time. We sort of filter stuff out. And when we're outside in nature, this amazing thing happens where we don't have to do that. We can just kind of relax and actually take it all in and then start to kind of space out in this dreamy, mind-wandering way that is just really fruitful. So I think that's part of what's going on, that our brains can kind of connect more widely and kind of open up to the sensory experience instead of trying to shut down.
Yeah, thank you. I was, listening deeply to what you were saying, and that just the sound of soft fascination, it somehow kind of captured just the sound of it. It kind of captured that idea so well, because there is a change that, as you described, that I would only describe it as being at ease or more quickly at ease in that environment. And just in my head, that must allow space for something else, And,
exactly. And it's space that we don't necessarily allow in very often.
It's tougher to find as well sometimes. Yeah.
It's tougher to find it. And the late Harvard entomologist, E.O. Wilson, talked about this term biophilia, that we have this kind of innate affiliation for living things. Yeah. And so when we're surrounded by them, it feels very pleasant for us. It's relaxing. It's comforting, even on a subconscious level. Like we may think, oh, I'm not someone who really likes, the mountains or the woods or whatever, but your brain actually knows how to read those landscapes. Our perceptual systems were actually built to read natural landscapes, right? We evolved in them. And so on some level, we're just kind of comfortable enough there that our brains can kind of let go a little bit and do some other stuff.
Yeah, that's it's quite the powerful idea, and I find the state of Oregon, grew up on the East Coast, and the state of Oregon is just so wildly different, both in its rugged ocean and Pacific Ocean and the mountains and the valley. It's such a different landscape, but there's a lot more opportunity to find that space and go towards that space here in the woods. So it's I can bump into it more regularly, right?
Yeah, you can bump into it, exactly. And there's so much variety in the Oregon landscape. There's
Yeah.
coastal stuff, there's forest stuff, there's mountain stuff, there's dry, there's wet. It really does keep you interested, I think. And there's a lot of novelty too, which our brains like.
Yeah. I had a statewide job. I was doing political organizing statewide, not too long after I arrived here, and I tell you, it was the best job in the best state at the best time, just in my life, because I did it for a couple years, but through that process, I just so adored each spot that I was arriving in, no matter where it was, and the ability to go to it. That I talk to friends of mine who are from Oregon, and I tell them stuff about Oregon. They're like, "What the heck? I didn't even know all that type of thing," because I just maybe went around more as an outsider, being like, "This is all wild," and so I view that as such a wonderful experience. The high desert as well, down in Klamath Falls and such. So,
Yeah, sounds great.
yeah. Wanted to chat again about Heartbreak as well, and I think one of the most profound ideas that came through in that book, as I read it, was some sort of reckoning with the reality of loss, relationship, divorce, and how much that impacts us. And I felt within the book of saying, there's a blasé attitude about something that can have significant mental and physical effects, in particular for women, but manifest in different genders. But in Heartbreak, which described as a personal and scientific journey, what was the process like as you were going through things, grappling with researching it as you're going through it? It sounds and reads as a unique experience. Can you just tell us like how that happened?
Yeah, I was going through this heartbreak after a 25-year marriage ended, and it was incredibly destabilizing and disorienting, and my body felt super hyper vigilant. Like I was kind of in this threat state because I didn't feel so comfortable or safe, being alone. And there are a lot of deeply evolved reasons, right, that our bodies kind of freak out a little bit if we feel like we've been abandoned. Even emotionally, our bodies kind of process it as if it's happening kind of in real time, on the savannah. And I guess, just as a science journalist, I was interested in that. I was like, it really surprised me. I'd never been heartbroken before. Certainly there are a lot of popular books out there about the way trauma kind of resides in our bodies, but I hadn't actually experienced it. And so, I was just interested in it. And I guess it's Nora Ephron, right, who said, everything is material. For a writer, it's kind of a fruitful and very urgent kind of curiosity, right? And so I think it's, as someone who just had written in the first person, kind of loosely for many, many years, it seemed a little bit natural to turn to that as a subject in my writing. And I also think it helped me, or at least I thought it would, because it would kind of get me out of bed every day and give me a project and a sense of purpose and an excuse to talk to some really interesting people who, I was hoping would be helpful to me. And of course they were. Then, of course, the problem was that I had to actually sit with this material for years and write the book. And so I think what had been initially kind of a helpful motivation became also a burden, right? I had to kind of like live in this land of heartbreak every day, while I was talking about the physical effects of it and, the sort of bummer trivia of what happens to people who feel lonely, or feel abandoned. I mean, there's a lot out there in the data about, early rates of death and increased chronic disease and heart attacks and loss of cognitive function, all this stuff that people go through kind of who are in trauma for a long time, or who feel lonely for a long time. So that was the downside. And then I guess, the upside again is when I was done with the book, when I actually kind of, pushed the button to send it off to my editor, it was a huge sense of relief. And like, I kind of had the sense of closure a little bit, and that, I'm so done with Heartbreak. I'm so done with it.
Yeah.
And I think that closure itself at the very end, was in fact helpful.
Yeah, it was, like I said, there's I don't want to say pulls you in, but it does. I mean, the personal aspect and thinking about when you're talking about the impacts on your body. And then I was thinking and trying to translate it too, because I'm thinking about my experience with relationship breakups. And I think that they've been like, as a human, like I've felt them. I felt them hard, and but there's a language type of thing. And even hearing about describing it in terms of the body, I had a radical realization that I've only grown that type of language or being able to realize the body impact of what's going on. And way back then I didn't. So I'm like,
Right.
What the heck was going on with my body? And I'm sure I didn't like process it. I think I know I was drinking more around that time after
Yeah.
the loss. And
Yeah.
so I know, in my head why there might not have been that processing, but just how serious of a matter it is to
Our
have
nervous
that
system
loss.
takes it really, really seriously. And I can't tell you how many readers, reach out to me and say, "Oh, now I understand what was happening in my body." And I think it's helpful. It's helpful to kind of understand that. When we go through heartbreak, it feels like a very singular experience. It may be something we only go through a couple of times in our lives. We don't necessarily have friends going through it at the same time. And so that's another reason it can be sort of disorienting. And so I think, being able to kind of read about it and understand, that there is a language for it, and there is a vocabulary, and that there is a very universally shared response. I think a lot of people do find that very helpful.
Yeah, is that community or group help or group experience that can really help with that. No, yeah, thank you for that work. I think it's recognized or even conveyed a sensation with the book that there was a lot of surprises as you went along, that you were kind of pulling together new ground. How surprised were you with the lack of maybe serious consideration of heartbreak as you explored this? What was that like? Were you just shocked, or what was it like?
I mean, I think that there is a lot out there about heartbreak in art and poetry and popular music, and but there wasn't a lot of science, and that's what my mind is drawn to, what my mind wants for reassurance. So that was surprising. And then the science itself was surprising, knowing that we have these transcription factors, these genetic factors in our immune system that respond to our social state, that listen, as one immunologist told me, we have these cells that listen for loneliness, and they change their genetic expression depending on whether we feel like we're alone or not. They change how they respond to viruses. They change how they respond to bacteria and infection. That was like mind blowing to me. And part of why I felt so motivated to write this book. I just felt like that was new, interesting stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, we were talking about some, it's very inspiring ideas about the environment and creativity and just thinking about the ways that you create. But I wanted to ask you one of the big questions that I ask all guests is, what is art?
Yeah, what is art? So I'm reading a book by the Irish poet John O'Donoghue called
Mhm.
Anamcara. And, you know, when I saw you were going to ask me that question, I just immediately thought of this passage that I had read from it.
Yeah.
And, you know, basically that art is this way to sort of reconcile our interior lives and our exterior lives. And so, you know, if it's okay, I'll just read a couple of sentences from
I'd
this.
love that. I'd love that. Yeah.
So, you know, John O'Donoghue, unfortunately, he's not alive any longer, but he was a priest who left being a priest to become kind of a spiritual philosopher. Uh, and so he thinks about these, he was thinking about these things. So here he says, to be wholesome, we must remain truthful to our vulnerable complexity. No one else can undertake this task for you. You are the one and only threshold of an inner world. He says this wholesomeness is holiness. Behind the facade of image and distraction, each person is an artist in this primal and inescapable sense. Each one of us is doomed and privileged to be an inner artist who carries and shapes a unique world. I thought that was really provocative and interesting.
Wow. That's quite amazing. I'm kind of bowled over by that. I've had a lot of poetry and a lot of succinct language on the show lately, and in listening to it and reading, there's just something special about that when it captures it for you. So thank you for that. Good timing. It seems like for everybody. Um, what do you think a little more specifically, if you want to build off that, what do you think the role of art is? What's it do for us?
I think it's a way of processing what it means to be human in a way that makes us feel kind of special and unique and privileged in our uniqueness, but also gives us a sense of belonging because it is through art, you know, that we access another language, you know, with which to share what it means to be human.
Yeah.
So
I
that's part of what I think it is. Yeah.
yeah. I thank you for that as well. What about art and healing? It's become a central. Like I started this show 4 years ago. I've done about 200 episodes, and you learn as you create things that you don't know the whole story of why you were creating it or what you were moving towards. But part of it is a lot connected to what you had read there of this kind of like primal freedom of this desire of this liberation of being yourself. Philosophy, art, and just being who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in that, in your books are about healing and recovery. And how crucial do you think arts are in that? I hear
Mm-hmm.
conversations the same, well, arts heal, and I'm not trying to poo-poo it, and because I agree with it, but how important is how important are the arts in helping us heal as humans?
Well, here's where the science journalist in me, I think, can add something because what I learned through writing this book is that one of the antidotes to grief is awe, is beauty. And that was fascinating to me. And I go into it quite a lot in the book, what experiencing awe kind of opens up for us. And there's been a lot of really interesting psychology, in this field. And among the things it opens up for us is a sense of belonging, sort of feeling connected, right, to something larger than ourselves. To feel awe is to feel a little bit overpowered by something amazing and something that is outside of us, but that we also feel connected to. That's really important for healing. And then it also, because it is a response to something external, it gets us out of our heads in this really healthy way. It kind of reduces our ego, quite famously. In a similar way that now there's a lot of research in the science of psychedelics, and why that's so transformational. There's something about kind of quieting our ego as we, I think, explode in some new neuronal pathways in our brains in a way that helps us tell stories of healing, who we are, who we want to be, how we relate to the world, that we don't have to be kind of enslaved to these patterns and stories that we've been telling ourselves for years. That there's awe kind of and beauty provide this like window of opportunity to write a new story. And I think that's a really undertold kind of antidote to human misery. So it really got me excited when I heard about the science of that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of like the idea of like discarding old notions, even around creativity, right? I am very influenced by David Lynch, and his description and experience with transcendental meditation of moving away from the idea of like all this intense suffering is what pushes the stuff out as an artist, which is part of the complicated story of an artist. But it was the reduction of the ego. It wasn't the exaggeration of it was the reduction of the ego. And then what is there, watching, what you would say, the big fish that are coming by and just catch them. And it sounds poetic, and but it's the idea that it's due to the rescission of, like, on the same point of the ego, that they're like, something different is happening here. So
Yeah.
I think it's a profound thought.
Like what John O'Donohue was saying, it's kind of both, right? It's that connection between what's going on inside of us and the external world. And sometimes we tend to just get a little too wrapped up in just the internal stuff. And it's really art, that can help pull us out.
Yeah, I know that. I'm glad, there's something good about talking to you about these issues too, because I've only got some science back there before that, because I was lodged in the philosophy department for a while. And even philosophers, some philosophers do a lot of science, but for me, it was like, what I know about science, like academically, is the philosophy of science, which sounds like, okay, you're going to think about the idea, but it's an important piece. And I'm so impacted by my background is in studying literature and philosophy, so I adore writing and the craft. And I think in your combination, like I said, of personal, scientific, and narrative, that's a really tough area to move through effectively. And I think you do, because the science will look at it one way, right? And then personal experience, emotion, and not so it's I see that you do that. I want to move to like the big overarching question regarding the show and the life, the universe, and everything is, I was wondering if you had an answer of why there's something rather than nothing.
You tell me. Isn't that the name of your show?
I know, right? It's like,
well, let's talk about it, because I don't know. I'm curious to know why you named your show that.
Yeah, why the question and everything? No, that's cool. Yeah, so something rather than nothing is like the biggest question of all, right? Like why did all this happen? And what I tried to do, like at the beginning of the show, or at least I was thinking about, is it's like can be approached through art, science, and philosophy, right? And like in very different ways. So I find guests who answer it like I made something from nothing, like this shit wasn't here before, and now like I did it and I made it. But I didn't know at the time when I started the show, but what I like about the big question is that since it's a variety show that I do a variety show in many different directions, I felt like I just cast a wide net and I'm able to talk to you and an opera singer and otherwise.
I love that.
My answer to it, I've had to give an answer before, is I'm very influenced by Buddhist philosophy. And there's the notion of nothing, which is different than there being no thing. It's of kind of like empty of inherent existence, right? Like that there's no thing behind something, that there's phenomena that we experience. And so it matters how you like look at the term nothing, no thing, right? In Western philosophy is like, I make things because I don't want there to be nothing. But you can also approach it in a different way of that there's like, okay, now this is going there. Like that there's no thing behind the thing, that there's no inherent existence there and there's phenomena. So Florence, I think you flipped the question and turned me into a circle.
Thank you.
I think you turned it around and turned me around on this show. Which is what the question can do. Florence, tell folks. I mean, there's a lot of places folks can go to find your writing. I mentioned Audible. Where do folks go to find your books, your writing?
Thank you for asking that. I have a website that's really easy to find. It's florencewilliams.com. There are links to my audio work and my print work, and retreats I give, talks that I give. I do, because I'm so into the 3-day effect, I actually do lead retreats for 3 days where we go out into a beautiful place and try to find some awe and try to experience some of that. Everything's on there.
Yeah, that's great. I even had looked at the website and I've seen some nice, I believe it's animated videos connected to your work as well. So there's like nice little promotional pieces and things in there. And
I worked with some great artists to do these like cutout videos as book trailers. That was really fun.
Those were lovely. Appreciate the audio work you do. I appreciate your writing and what you go into. I like the going right in with things, and I think you're I think you're courageous in trying to pull off what you do, and I think you pull off with what you do, and it's and I think that the recent award recognizes that for literary science writing. So I've appreciated all your work, and just wanted to thank you for chatting some of these big questions, turning the big question around on me, talking about poetry, Heartbreak, and I wanted to thank you so much, Florence, for coming on to the show.
Well, thank you, Ken. It's really an honor to be here, and it's just an honor, when anyone actually reads my books and makes it through them and wants to talk about them. So thank you.
Yeah, that's what I've kind of done my whole thing. If I find one that I get into, and it's all piled through after that. So great chatting with you, and best of luck in your adventures, and I hope to sometime be out in one of those 3 days and maybe find
go for 3 days.
That's
what we all need, if you can.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Florence.
Thank you, Ken.
This is Something Rather Than Nothing,